ladies and gentlemen, the President of Africa.
Mesdames et Messieurs, le président de la Banque Afrique de Développement, Dr Adekunle Adesina, on va lui faire un chaleureux accueil.
Excellent. In the spirit of
Dans l'esprit de l'Union européenne, merci. Bonjour tout le monde.
Bon dia, buenos dias, assalamu alaikum.
Chose dans le contexte africain, je suis Ibrahim Diang du beau pays qu'est le Sénégal, Afrique de l'Ouest. Et j'ai le plaisir d'être le modérateur de cette réunion assise très importante. Comme vous le savez, je commencerai par saluer la présence parmi nous, qui a encore une fois montré son engagement pour aider l'Afrique et faire en sorte que l'accès à l'électricité soit le continent. Nous avons également le plaisir de voir avec nous Dr Manu Abouzei, qui est le président de la Commission africaine pour l'infrastructure et l'énergie, qu'on va l'applaudir également pour sa présence parmi nous. Nous avons Wangas Neman Mimika, qui est le commissaire à la coopération internationale et au développement à l'Union européenne. On va l'applaudir également. Nous avons avec nous Jorgana Regzeterik, qui est le premier vice-président à la BIRD. On va l'applaudir. L'année dernière, dans la même salle, une plateforme a été lancée en collaboration avec l'Union européenne et l'Union africaine. Cette plateforme a inscrit l'énergie, notamment l'énergie durable, au cœur de tout ce que nous faisons. Nous savons tous que sans énergie, il n'y a pas d'investissement. En conséquence, c'est un secteur transversal et extrêmement important. Beaucoup doit couler sous les ponts depuis l'année dernière en termes de réalisation et de développement, mais également en termes de recommandations pour faire avancer cette plateforme. Ce que nous aimerions faire, c'est pour commencer de montrer une vidéo de 2 minutes pour faire le bilan et vous faire le point d'information avant que nous ne disions les mots d'ouverture. Merci. La vidéo.
Access to clean energy is the first step to fight climate change and empower our societies. Education and opportunities for women and generations to come. The European Union is committed to achieving these goals together with its partner countries. During his State of the Union speech in 2018, Commission President Juncker announced the new Africa-Europe Alliance for Sustainable Investment and Jobs. The alliance is forging a true partnership between Africa and Europe, a partnership among equals. Investment in Africa, strengthen trade, improve education and skills, and create jobs and business opportunities for African and EU industry. To deliver on this key partnership, the high-level platform for sustainable energy investments was launched at the Africa Investment Forum in 2018. The platform works to identify the key challenges faced in unlocking investment in sustainable energy in Africa and proposes possible shared solutions. To prepare the high-level platform report, more than 50 experts from Africa and Europe attended 4 meetings in Brussels and Conakry. Each meeting focused on a different aspect of the energy landscape in Africa, with 3 working groups addressing the challenges they see as most important.
The high-level platform really brings together such a variety of decision makers and thought leaders in the area of sustainable energy investment. And it's a great opportunity to ensure coordination, cooperation, collaboration, all those things that I think have been lacking.
The high-level platform is a place that brings together the actors that need to be part of the energy transition in Africa.
When minds meet, solutions come. I will tell you, women are the most people suffering from energy poverty. So any recommendation which excludes women to me is an event.
Energy with productive activities. Same with education. I mean, the continent needs to make a leapfrog on education. You cannot do it without electricity. Not only because it's not sufficient to light up your notebook with an oil lamp, but because you have to connect children in Africa with technology. And for that, you need electricity.
To see that without affordable, reliable, sustainable, modern energy services, you cannot really grow economies. You cannot be part of the digital revolution.
What we want is to move from words to kilowatts. That is what is very important, because we've been having lots and lots of words and lots of global talk show, but now we want to see more and more kilowatts.
That the report is not something that you can find off the shelf, rather than an action plan that can be delivered.
Indeed, the key words
En effet,
platform was direct, live
c'est
television.
la télévision en direct.
In light of, as you may have heard it,
Comme vous avez
it's all about
entendu,
collaboration,
il s'agit
it's
de
all about
collaboration, il s'agit de
partnership.
coopération et de partenariat.
That is why I
C'est la
am
raison pour
delighted
laquelle
to
j'ai
welcome our
le
first
grand
speaker,
plaisir d'accueillir notre premier
who made
orateur
access to energy on the continent
qui a
his
fait de l'accès à
main
l'énergie
priority.
sa principale
Right now,
priorité
you know, I'm
sur le
referring to
continent.
Dr.
Vous savez que je veux
Akinwumi
parler de Dr.
Adesina as our first
Akinwumi
speaker
Adesina
for
comme notre
opening
premier
remarks.
intervenant pour dire son mot d'ouverture.
Thank you very much and good afternoon,
Merci et
everybody.
bonsoir à tous.
First, let me welcome my dear brother and friend, Minister, Commissioner Mimika, who has been a dear friend of Africa in all areas of development. But I know that in times of renewable energy, you have been fantastic. I know that you will soon be retiring, but I can tell you, you have renewable energy right inside of you. You'll be back many, many, many times over. Let me also thank the Honorable Commissioner for Energy, Amani. You're from the African Development Bank. We give our best people to African Union, so you're doing a great job there. Welcome and keep up that good work. Ladies and gentlemen, I think this event today could not be possible, me standing right in front of you without light. You can imagine what will you be seeing, just dark, right? Development cannot happen in the dark. Whether it's health, whether it's education, whether it's water, sanitation, whether it's processing chocolates, cocoa into chocolates, whether it is driving electric cars, as everybody's moving into today, whether it is the fourth industrial revolution that goes with robotics, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and all the things that are necessary to power economies forward, everything relies on energy. And in fact, I always like to look at energy from a human body. And so if you look into your body, if you don't have any blood, you're dead. And any economy without electricity is pretty much dead. And so when we look at power, it affects economies, it affects people, it affects livelihoods, it affects every single thing. And so, in fact, so important is electricity and light that when God made the heavens and the earth, the first thing he said was, let there be light. And so you need light. And when you have light, you have everything else. And so Africa cannot, as I've always said, operate in the dark. Africa cannot develop in the dark. We're living in 2019. 1864, Thomas Edison developed the light bulb. And we cannot be struggling to light up the light bulb. In particular, when we look at the potential that we have. I was recently in Chad to see President Deby. And when I got in there, the Minister of Economy met me at the airport. It was 48 degrees. And I ran straight into my car, and I left him on the tarmac. And he came in and he said, well, why did you leave me on the tarmac? I said, because I don't want to have a heat stroke. 48 degrees. I got into the palace to see the president. I said, Mr. President, I'm here, but my skin is burning. But I was told that your access to electricity in terms of access for a country is 8%. He said, no, 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 no. Who told you 8%? C'est pas vrai, ça. C'est pas vrai du tout. Non, on n'est pas 8% là. Non.
We're not at 8%. It's not true. It's not accurate. Et je l'ai dit, monsieur.
C'est le nombre qui est correct. He said,
That was the accurate figure.
5%. I did my master's and PhD thesis in Nigeria Republic. 84. Went for field research when I was at Purdue University. Rural access rate then was 0%. We used candles, we used group d'électrogène, that's all we were doing. I was back in Niger about 2 years ago. I went to see the president and was having breakfast, and there was one of the ministers, and it was Minister of Energy, who said, well, you know, we have a new policy, and we want to really drive energy up. And I said, what's your goal? He said, well, we want to have rural electrification rate to move to about 10-15%. I said, what is it now? He said 0.8%. I was there, 1984. I was back just 2 years ago, 0.8%. I told Mr. President, I said the only thing acceptable is 100%. So basically, because of the solar, we have so much solar, 11 terawatts of solar potential that we have. And that's what I told President Idris Deby. You can literally connect your cables to my skin and put it into the grid. I will supply power to the screen, to the grid, just for being here for 2 days. I'm not suggesting that you do that. But when you look at hydro, 350 gigawatts of potential. You look at geothermal, 15 gigawatts potential, wind, 150 gigawatts potential. But if it was possible to power Africa with potential, Africa will have 100% electricity. Potential is important, but nobody eats it. So I think our collaboration with the European Union Commission, with the African Union Commission, with all the partners here, is how to unlock Africa's tremendous amount of energy potential. We should be exporting energy. We shouldn't have energy deficit on this continent at all. And so to do that, we need to make sure that we harness the power of the private sector. We have to make sure that we have good regulatory reforms. We have to make sure tariffs are cost reflective to ensure that investors in the energy sector can actually make money out of it. But generating power alone is not enough. You've got to transmit power, you've got to distribute power. Access to energy itself, it's an affordability of energy is particularly important. And so I want to say we're so delighted with our work with the European Union Commission. We have our partners here, European Investment Bank, EBRD is here, IFC, all of you, that are our colleagues that are investing in many areas of this that we need to unlock. But I want to just close by mentioning 3 things. People are desperate for success. As African Development Bank, when I launched the bank to have the Light Up and Power Africa, just in the last 4 years alone, we've connected 16 million people to electricity, just in 4 years. With our new general capital increase, which we got, and thanks to all our shareholders, we expect in the next general capital increase cycle to connect at least 104 million people to electricity. Now, but in trying to do that, let me just give you an example of what people think. I went to Kenya. I got up to see the last mile connectivity project, which is Axrock is here, a guy in renewable energy. And we came off the plane, the helicopter. And there was this lady walking behind me. And she was so excited in this village. And she said, somebody said, well, that is the president of African Development Bank who financed this project. And she said, I don't know the African Development Bank. All I know was that we once were in darkness, and now we have light. And now that is the power of all the work we do, the hope we bring to communities when we deliver. The second one I want to say is the biggest renewable energy project we are going to embark on. Bakuri is here from Morocco, great example. Nu Uzazate, many of us, EBRD, EIB, all of us, we invested in it. Fantastic, the largest concentrated solar power plant in the world. thanks to this man. Get up, you're too humble for what you do. Let's you see, he can't even get up. Yeah. Lake Turkana project, massive. Geothermal in eastern, Rwanda, again, massive project. So we know that these things work. And so we've launched what's called the Desert to Power, which is to help the Sahelian countries to have 10,000 megawatts of solar power that will make it the largest solar zone in the world. And irrigation in the Sahel is roughly 7.6 kilowatt per hour per meter square. It is the highest irrigation you have in the world. And so we have to turn that into electricity, into power for them. And I really want to ask for partnership across everywhere here to make it possible. Because it's not just about power for the Sahel, by the way. It's about security. It's about migration. The terrorists, they love dark places. They operate, nobody can track them. The Sahel will be totally different, more secure area when it has access to electricity, universal access. And I think solar is the way. For us as the African Development Bank, I've said it, coal is the past. We're not going to be investing in the past. We're investing in the future. Renewable energy is the future, and we have to continue to invest in that. The last thing I want to say is about cooking. I grew up in a family where we had to use 3 stones to cook. And my mother will put the pot on it. And we have to look for the wick. We put it in and you blow it into your eyes, your everything. That was how I grew up. And just to tell you that that's not the way to cook. We lose today 300,000 kids just from the effect of that. 300,000 women dying just because they have to provide meals for their family. It's not possible. And so as we talk about energy, let's talk also about access to clean cooking energy for women. This is absolutely very, very important. You want to clap for that? You go ahead. And finally, just so that you see what this does for someone, as a graduate student, when I arrived in the United States in 1983, I was received by a lovely American family, a professor. I stayed with them for 2 weeks before school resumed. The day I arrived, I took out my suitcase. I took out all my clothes and I began to iron them. I ironed them for 1 hour. And the wife of Dr. Melby, Chris Melby's wife, came and said, "Akin, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm ironing my clothes." He said, "Yes, that's the problem. You've been doing it for the last 1 hour." I said, "Yes, because they may take away the electricity. They may cut it any time from now." And he said, "What does that mean?" I said, "They don't take away power here." He said, "Do what?" So that was when I realized that I come from a society where not having electricity was normal. Not having electricity was actually abnormal. So we have actually taken what was abnormal and normalized it. So my challenge and my encouragement for all of us is that let's make access to electricity on this continent normal. Let's change the abnormal back to normal. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, now I know why I used to iron my clothes when I studied in the U.S. for 2 hours. Again, thank you. As you say, potential cannot be eaten. It has to be unlocked for the benefit of our people, and it's delightful to know that the bank has an ambition to light up and empower Africa as one of its high five. An equally important partner of this platform is our continental organization, the AU. Is my distinguished honor to invite Dr. Amani Abu Zain, who is the African Union Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy for the bank. Give it a round of applause.
It's always very difficult to speak after President Adesina. Well, what he didn't say, well, he said I'm on loan to the African Union, and in other version, I'm an equity investment of the African Development Bank in the African Union, and really delighted to be here with you. As I said, it's difficult to speak up to President Adesina, but let me try. I welcome all of you, but particularly our friend and partner, Commissioner Mimica, who has proven again and again how dedicated and committed he and his team to development in Africa in general, and in strengthening the ties between the two organizations, EU and AU, in all sectors, not just energy. So let me thank you officially here on behalf of all my colleagues at the African Union Commission for the excellent work that you have been doing, sir. Also delighted to see a large number of our partners here present, and may I, and I dare say some of our potential partners also. So hopefully that being here in this forum, and specifically in this session, would encourage you to go even further in terms of working with us, all of us on the continent. So that's an excellent opportunity. And you see, the Africa-Europe Alliance is just one example of how wonderfully we can work with our most important and biggest partner, that's Europe. And the work in energy that we've been doing has been really excellent. The partnership that we're having, or the initiative that we're having, has managed to bring not only, you know, the investors or the development partners, but mainly the private sector, and we're really keen on the participation, active participation of the private sector. We're very much encouraged by the progress that's being made in all our countries in terms of improving the investment climate. So this should be a signal for all of you here from the private sector to get into our countries and start exploring the incredible opportunities that there is. President Adesina, and I hear a lot, about potential. When we say potential, it kind of gives the impression that nothing is happening, that we are still at the potential stage. A lot has been happening on the continent, and a lot is happening on the continent. We mentioned, of course, with great pride, the project of Ouarzazate, the solar power plant. And if I may, Mr. Bakouri, to claim just a small part of the credit as a humble contributor to this great project. But also we have the Benban in Egypt, in which EBRD has been extremely active. We have, of course, the Lake Turkana, the power pool in West Africa, the huge project of geothermal, the African Union project in all the Eastern Africa, the mini hydro projects across the continent, again promoting the use of mini hydro across the continent. It's very important. In addition to the regional projects for transmission and the power pools. Now, why I'm mentioning these and I'm focusing on regional projects? Of course, all of you have heard of the African Free Trade Area. Who hasn't? And two things, when people talk about free trade area or digitalization, because they are, I must say, they are the sexiest two topics when you talk about Africa, the sexiest two topics, either digitalization or African free trade. So my question, digitalization. The basic question is, how are you even going to supply or have internet access if you don't have energy? So energy is at the basis of digitalization. And any of you who has heard me speak in any forum about digitalization, I insist on mentioning and talk about energy. We have to invest in energy. The second is about free trade area. My question to all of us in Africa, I say, what are we going to trade in this free trade area? Goods manufactured elsewhere, so we are establishing the free trade area to market other people's products, or do we have industrialization plans in place and we need energy for? And of course, we do have large programs for industrialization. So again, energy is at the basis of that. So whether it's one or the other, or many other fields, whether it's education, health, and so on and so forth, of course, it's always energy. an important message that was sent by that was said by President Adesina, and I'm really, as I said, as if he read my intervention, is clean cooking. Only last week we had a summit in Nairobi. Only last week on clean cooking, and we're making it. I am making it a cheval de bataille for the African Union. It's not just about. It's an ethically unacceptable that in this day and age, women and children are still dying because they breathe fume and the accidents caused by it. It is unacceptable. So whether you make any calculation you want, but at the human level, at the ethical level, at the economic level, it's unacceptable. In a continent that is full of potential for energy, I mean, I'm using the word potential again, but also, and I must say, gas. And why are we not omitting gas? Gas, which is still the cleanest of the fossil fuel. So I do not wish to really read a speech that is not, that without a soul, but only to use this opportunity to re-emphasize some of the messages that you've heard earlier, and also to repeat what was said at the opening of this forum, the AIF. Again, I'm quoting President Adesina: if you're not in Africa, you're not in business. So with that, I thank you all.
And thank God we're in Africa, so therefore we're in business. An equally important partner of this platform is the European Union. And I'd like to invite Mr. Nemen Mimika, who is the Commissioner of International Cooperation and Development of the European Commission, for his remarks.
Very good afternoon, Excellencies, distinguished participants, dear colleagues and friends. My thanks firstly go to President Adesina for his opening remarks, for bringing us together at this African Investment Forum, and for hosting today's meeting of the high-level platform for sustainable energy investments. My thanks also to Dr. Ramani Abuzaid, African Union Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy, for co-hosting this event. There is no doubt that Africa has the world's attention. The economic pulse of the continent is beating faster and harder. And in international fora, Africa's voice is being heard louder and stronger. And there is a palpable sense that an economic transformation of the continent is very much within reach. Europe has a long-standing political partnership with Africa as its neighboring continent and biggest trading partner, investor, and donor. But it was high time we started pouring our energy into forging a stronger partnership based on mutual interest and opportunities. It is for this very reason that President Juncker launched the Africa-Europe's Alliance for Sustainable Investments and Jobs just over a year ago. The alliance intensifies Africa and Europe's economic partnership, focusing on trade, investment, education, and skills, with the goal of creating inclusive and sustainable growth and jobs for future generations. As some of you know, we will soon have a new European Commission. An ambitious Green Deal is one of President-elect Ursula von der Leyen's most pressing priorities. It is, in her words, achieving climate neutrality is a long-term economic imperative, and those who act first and fastest will be the ones making the most of this transition. With this in mind, Europe is set to become the first climate neutral region, leading and paving the way for our partner countries. We will need to invest in innovation and research, redesign our economy, and update our energy and industrial policy. With its rich natural capital, impressive economic growth rates, and a growing young population, Africa too has huge potential to embark on a transition while staying on the path to sustainable growth. This is where renewable energy, energy efficiency, and resource efficiency offer incredible opportunities for investments, partnerships, and innovation for both European and African private and public sector. Think about it. Currently, electricity reaches only about half of the population in sub-Saharan Africa, while clean cooking only 1/3. If Africa is to continue its rise towards sustainable industrialization, building a sustainable energy sector is fundamental. But let's be clear, business as usual and traditional development assistance will not be enough to meet the increasing energy demand and the climate emergency. The European experience in building a single energy union, which has encouraged power trading and brought us energy security, is very telling. And we are keen to build on this in our cooperation with the African Union Commission. In addition to that, the African-Europe Alliance sets out a comprehensive plan for harnessing all the potential of the sustainable energy sector. It does so by offering a new generation of financial instruments under the External Investment Plan to scale up investments, by promoting standards of modern and sustainable technology, climate and environmental and labor protection, social fairness, gender equality, and responsible business conduct, and by improving the investment climate and boosting strategic public-private dialogue. In terms of our financial commitment in the energy sector, the numbers speak for themselves. The European Union is Africa's biggest partner for sustainable energy, with 2.7 billion euros for sub-Saharan Africa between 2014 and 2020. I'm also proud to say that in terms of global targets, we are well on track to deliver on our 3 big bets: giving 40 million people access to energy, generating 6.5 gigawatts of renewable energy, and saving 15 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. Dear colleagues, our partnership with Africa on climate action, sustainable energy, and access to energy is a priority. I'm keen to listen to this platform's conclusions and recommendations, because your experience and ideas are what will help us turn our vision for sustainable energy in Africa into reality. Let me finish by thanking Mr. Kande Humkela for his leadership and personal commitment in driving the work of this dedicated group of African and European experts. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the outcome and recommendations of this important session. Thank you.
Mr. Nimika, as Dr. Adesina say, it seems like you have that renewable energy in you, and we hope even after the time we will continue to benefit from your wisdom and your commitment to moving Africa forward from the European Union. Now, the purpose of this platform is also to expand the partnership to other institutions who are equally important, but also contribute to developing the energy sector on the continent. I'd like to now invite one of those partners, Mr. Jürgen Rieck-Terek, who is the first Vice President and Head of Client Services Group at EBRD, for his opening remarks. Sir.
Commissioner Mimica, good pronunciation. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to briefly address this first plenary meeting of the high-level platform for sustainable energy investments in Africa. We have been proud to participate in the rich discussions and to have had an opportunity to contribute to the debate, what we at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, also known as EBRD, have learned about how to overcome the challenges to invest in sustainable energy in Africa. As outlined in the platform's report, without massive investments and crucially, a change in the shape of that investment, 600 million people in Africa will still lack access to electricity in 2030. At the same time, Africa has some of the best wind, solar, and hydro resources in the world. This creates a huge opportunity to deploy an affordable, secure, and also clean energy in a large scale across the continent. Since EBRD started operations in North Africa in 2012, we have become the largest financier of private renewable energy in North Africa. We have financed more than 1 gigawatt of wind and solar projects in North Africa in that project. We are particularly proud to have been the leading financier for the 1,600 megawatt solar park developed in Benban in the Aswan region in Egypt, the largest solar park in Africa, which actually was just completed a few weeks ago. Drawing on this experience, let me make 2 short observations as a contribution to the debate to come. Firstly, the private sector can deliver the investment in renewable energy that is needed. We believe it's also the best delivery mechanism. Time and again, we have seen how well-structured regulatory frameworks can mobilize the power of competition to drive innovation and efficiency. And we see this with the success of competitive auctions in delivering ever cheaper power. Most recently, for example, Ethiopia secured solar power at a price of just $2.50 per kilowatt hour. My second observation is that we must also focus on the other side of the meter. Developing power networks is a key condition for the mass penetration of renewables. Solar and wind farms cannot be deployed without bringing the green power to market with expanded electricity transmission and distribution networks. Transmission lines improve the reliability of supply, minimize losses, balance generation surpluses or deficits between countries, and strengthen national and regional energy security and climate resilience. These dynamics, ladies and gentlemen, form the basis of our engagement in the sector and our contribution to the expansion of sustainable energy in Africa. And we look forward to continuing to contribute to this debate with the multi-stakeholder group of the platform. I look forward to a lively discussion, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your contribution and commitment to this platform as indicated. Now, before we move on to the panel discussion, where we gather different stakeholders to react to the recommendation from the platform, I'd like to bring in a man that Africa is extremely proud of for having been the first Sub-Saharan African, the Director General of UNIDO, that we took him out of retirement to support this platform, but also for having been the Special Representative of the Secretary General of the United Nations on sustainable energy for all. He was in his comfortable Sierra Leone thinking that he's going to get away from us We snatch him out to get his energy, his leadership, and I want us to just give us a lowdown on some of the recommendations that the platform has made before we bring in the stakeholders to react to this key recommendation. Give him a big hand, my friend, Glenn, to come in. And by the way, we just found out this morning we're wearing the same outfit. So I'm suspecting he has the GPS in my room at the hotel, checking on what I'm wearing. And that's exactly the communion and the partnership. But thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am most honored to be asked to play this role, and I want to thank the EU and the African Union Commissions for giving me this opportunity to coordinate a fine group of 50 experts. They gave us very little time, about 7 months, but it was not a difficult task because they had energy experts, practitioners, bankers in the group. My job was to be a good facilitator. What is unique about what we've done? There are a number of features here that are unique in this report. It's almost a 100-page report, but we gave you the executive summary, some of the key recommendations. Just to highlight a few. We decided to treat bulk power and off-grid at the same level. And part of the message here is Africa has no choice. It is not either on-grid or off-grid. It is both. There are communities where the grid will not arrive in the next 20, 30 years. I know, my village is one of them in Sierra Leone. So we treated them equal. You need bulk production to power industrialization and structural change in Africa. We want to modernize. We want to grow. But you need distributive energy as well so that nobody is left in darkness. The technologies are known, the solutions are there, but you need energy as an enabler of agricultural development, jobs. Again, you've heard a lot about the gender issues. So we treated them equal, off-grid and on-grid. Second, normally you have reports on mini-grids. You have another one on bulk. We said no, it's both. So the policymakers know they have to plan for both. Second, we proposed in our Chapter 3 an integrated planning model that countries should now plan for both. As you plan for grid, bulk power, transmission, distribution, generation, you at the same time plan for off-grid to create markets for investments in off-grid same time, not as an afterthought. So we propose an integrated framework, which we are already testing now in a few countries, Rwanda, Nigeria, and Kenya, by some of our partners who were in the group. Third, clean cooking. We don't want to talk about it. I led energy issues for the UN for 10 years. We love to talk about solar, wind, geothermal. We even avoid gas. And of course, we have to talk about gas too. Africa has a lot of gas. 30% of the new oil and gas discoveries were in Africa in the last 7 years. But gas is a good transition for renewables, but it integrates well with renewables. However, that gas can also solve another problem, clean cooking. We treated clean cooking the same way we treated electrification. Why? Even in the best performing African countries on electrification, Kenya, let's forget South Africa for a minute, Kenya and Ghana in West Africa, 80% of the population rely on firewood and charcoal for cooking. The forests are disappearing. Our children and women are dying. Over 500,000 premature deaths every year. It is the silent tsunami. It is the second cause of morbidity in Africa today. But it is not known. Some people say, oh, it's a woman's problem. Why should they die when they cook? But the forests are disappearing fast. So we treated clean cooking also equal. We have the gas resources. But hopefully, with renewable energy, we can use clean electricity as well. So in short, we put all of these solutions, thick report, but we've extracted the recommendations. You have a copy of the summary and key recommendations. My job was just to highlight a few of them. 11 categories of recommendations. We have about 50 recommendations and about 80 action points. Why action points? Both the EU and the AU said, look, don't just give us recommendations. How do we implement them? So we had to go back, spend another 2 months to begin to say, okay, what are the action points? And it will be up to the partners to prioritize where you begin. Let me say up front, there is no quick fix here. You heard the numbers that President Adesina gave. 5% electrification in some countries. My country is 15% right now. 15%. That is in the urban areas. If you go to the rural areas, my village, it's probably 0.5% or 0.8%. So there are no quick fixes, and that's why the recommendations are comprehensive. Bottom line is it's about creating markets. So if we go on to page 9, you'll see some of the recommendations there. First category is policy and regulation. We emphasize, we put it number 1. It's about markets. It's not about aid. It's not about charity. If Africa wants to connect the next 600 million who do not have now, and the additional 1 billion we add by 2050, an additional 1 billion people we're adding by 2050, we need markets. So we put a lot of recommendations there on public policy. We need the right public policies to incentivize market development, investments, but also certainty of policy. And for that, we've listed capacity building for the ministries and the regulators. You see a number of recommendations there on page 9. So we started with that. It's about markets, whether it's mini-grids, whether it's big power production or solutions for clean cooking, it is about markets. We have to develop markets. Governments have to have the political will. They also have to make their utilities solvent. Only 2 utilities in sub-Saharan Africa are liquid right now. All the others are in the red. They're not viable, they're not attractive. So we've spent a lot of, paid a lot of attention to that. Second category, indeed, provides then project identification. I was very thrilled yesterday when I heard one of the investors in the presentation say, money is not the problem. The problem is lack of projects. Of course, we had some bankers in the group too. My friends were the African Development Bank, EIB, and others. I said, okay, I've been hearing that for 10 years. But I know it's expensive to develop projects. They don't have the money for feasibility studies, environmental impact assessment. So you'll see in the second category, we talk about a project development facility. How do we support private sector or governments to develop a pipeline of projects? Energy projects are complicated. I know Bakuri can talk about that in the panel. Ozazat did not happen by accident. They needed financing, including concessional financing. Otherwise, it will not happen. I was with you in February when we were looking at the Climate Investment Fund there. Third category, we talked a lot about finance. Yes, the money is there, but it's not moving into Africa. The amount of, we've given you numbers there. Maybe we need $65 billion per year invested in various systems, from generation to transmission to distribution, but also in the mini-grid space. We talk a lot about financing. EU has some good tools. We're saying scale them up. This whole conference is about speed, scale, and synergy. We want scaled up projects, not little projects anymore. And I need to emphasize that sense of urgency. There will be 2.2 billion Africans in 2050. It's tomorrow. You can't plan for that number in small doses. This partnership is important because I say to my friends in Europe, you are the closest to us. You are the biggest trader with us. But if we have that 2.2 billion, our kids will come over. We want them to visit you as paying tourists because they have purchasing power, they have income, but we could be good markets. So we're talking about real money, Commissioner, real money, and the bankers in the room. But to do that, indeed, we need what we said at the beginning, markets, good regulation, certainty. We then moved on. We talked about the mini-grid space. World Bank did a report recently to see how we connect another 500 million people with mini-grids. Mini-grids are struggling, let's face it. The World Bank has done a comprehensive survey. We subsidize transmission lines. We subsidize distribution lines. But then we tell the mini-grid operator, you do your own lines yourself. Come on, let's be frank. We talk about subsidies here. Smart subsidies will work. Even the Germans had to do feed-in tariffs. Africa needs the same. If we're going to have solar home system operators, if we're going to have these mini-grids, there has to be some concessional financing and subsidies somewhere. Either you finance the consumer to pay us, or you finance the supplier to take the risk to invest. I wanted to emphasize that. And finally, clean cooking. Clean cooking is crucial. We always leave it out. I was leading energy systems for 10 years, as I said, for the whole UN. We talked about everything else. This was one we left behind. And the numbers are bad. Globally, 3 billion without clean cooking solutions. causing over 4 million premature deaths every year, much more than HIV, AIDS, malaria, and TB combined. It's the silent tsunami killing women and children. Africa needs solutions. We're cutting down the trees very fast. We're contributing to black carbon. But we want to save lives and save the ecosystems and save our agricultural base. So if I was asked to give you highlights, you have the document in front of you. We hope we'll have a lively debate. But more importantly, action after here. We don't want these recommendations staying on the shelves of the AU and the EU. We want action, we want partnerships, we want investments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that passionate delivery, but also for the commitment you show to the sector. I think the 4 takeaways that we have from the conversation will guide us our discussion. Without market, there isn't anything. Capacities are important. Financing is also important, but project preparation is extremely important as well. And highlighting clean cooking, which will make very happy my good friend Linda here, who is passionate about quick in clean cooking. Now, without further ado, I'd like to invite our speakers to join me on stage for an interaction based on the recommendation made and shared by our friend there, with the hope that we can actually move away from the recommendation to where do we go from there, from the platform. Let me call them up to come on stage. Mustafa Bakouri, who is the CEO of Moroccan Agency for Sustainable Energy. Give a round of applause, Mustafa. Carla Montesi, Director and the Planet and Prosperity in DG at DEFCO. Carla. Maria Shah Barragan, who is the Director of Global Partners Department at AIB, to as an AIB. Sanjeev Gupta, if you're here, Executive Director for Financial Services at AFC. Sanjeev, are you with us? You may have gone back to Nigeria without saying goodbye. So I'd like to invite Valerie Levkov, who is Senior VP for Africa, Middle East, and Eastern Mediterranean at EDF. Welcome. Of course, the African Development Bank, Danielle Score, who is the Acting Director for Renewable Energy and at the African Development Bank. Last but not least, my good friend, Linda Davis, CEO of Giraffe Bioenergy. So as indicated to you, for those who need translation in French, if you can put your device, because my first question will be directed to our friend from Morocco, who's going to be in French. Mustafa Bakouri, vous venez donc du Maroc.
Mustafa Bakouri from Morocco, as President Adesina said, you have scored a major success with regard to solar energy because you set up the largest solar energy plant there. My question is access to market, financing, and also setting up a framework that allowed for the development of the sector. Could you share with us in what way those choices were relevant to the Moroccan market? Thank you, first of all, for the kind invitation. We are seeking together to develop the energy sector and sustainable sector in Morocco. We have all paradoxes in Africa, and I believe that these paradoxes are now something of the past, and we have sufficient tools and stakeholders and means to accelerate the pace of change on the ground. There are lots of things that are taking place. Dr. Amani referred to this earlier on. With regard to the recommendations that were presented, then there is a large range of these so as to optimize the possibility for energy projects, and especially sustainable projects, to develop. I'd like to add something to this. They tend not to appear all the time on paper, but they are derived from experience. I'd like to mention in the first place, and I believe all of us would agree on what I'm going to say, it is fundamental that this sector should be a sector where projects could be planned for medium to long term. And in this regard, you need to have leadership at the highest level, because it is this that allows, first of all, to unite all the stakeholders. Energy is a cross-cutting sector, so there are lots of other parties involved nationally. So you need to bring all these stakeholders together, operators, regulators, legislative stakeholders, and for this you need to have some authority somewhere that is involved with all powers and capacities that they have. Also, you need to make the actions visible. So in addition to the legal framework, these were mentioned clearly and in a detailed manner. But I would like to say that for any given country, it is crucial to know your resources. Of course, we know this in oil and gas. And in renewable energy, it is the same thing. You need really to know your resources with the highest level of reliability. And you shouldn't just wait for it to get hot and say, well, I have the resources. No, you need to have information on this in a reliable manner. And this can certainly enlighten us as to the technologies to harness for this. There are other elements that are important for investors and financiers. This information relates to identifying the sites, where the sites are, so that you can optimize the quality of sunshine or even, wind energy, and also sites that also take into consideration the exploitation sites. You need also to facilitate the transfer and conveyance of energy. So you need to have infrastructure for this. This depends, of course, on the situation of the given country. I would also like to add two other items that have been important. In the case of Morocco, we started to develop energy projects in a logic of a complete change. So we decided then to have dedicated agencies, dedicated authorities. So we had to have agencies that really specialize in this. So we really forsook the other reflexes, the other agencies that dealt with the classical projects. Another thing is that in many countries the utilities are having problems, and it is important here to have new commitments made in a clear environment, because renewable energies require a lot of investment, and then after that they cost less. So these investments then shouldn't be there just to weigh heavy on the financial commitments of utilities that are having their own problems. In fine, it is also important to place all this within a unified strategy. In Morocco, we granted a lot of importance to the first project because we felt that it is an investment in the strategy. The first project had to be conducted in all necessary transparency. I'd like to clarify what I mean by transparency. That is, we have been clear with all our partners, Mrs. Ameni, asked on the credit that was allowed. That was an important success factor. We thought that that project wasn't just our project, it was a more general project, and the success was a collective success. Thank you, Mustafa.
On what Mustafa has just laid out, additional recommendations with regard to the importance of leadership, having a dedicated institution in charge of renewable energy, but more importantly, knowing your assets, but also picking the right sites. In your case, my question to you, the recommendation you heard from the report, how are they going to actually help you in what you're already doing on the continent in the energy sector, in building from the recommendation to beef up your work in the energy sector on the continent?
Thank you, Ibrahim. But let me start doing one other thing. I would really personally, particularly take this occasion to thank our leader, Kande, for its guidance and support, and to particularly thanks the member of our platform for their engagement, for their commitment, and also in particular to the chair of the platform. Let me mention Daniel, of course, that is with us, Ignacio Perez de Arriaga from Florence School of Regulation that is in the room, that Cathy Orbi from the African Green Co, Marcos Women from ARE, Roberto Vigotti for Rest for Africa. So let me give to them a round of applause for their work. And now, coming to your question.
Going back to my question.
Yes, how we will integrate this recommendation in our work. This recommendation will be really key, will support us in better structuring our work at the moment, but also in the future work. The priorities that are here could appear as to be many, but are key priorities that we will take into account. So, of course, we mentioned already many times, I will not repeat them, but we mentioned, of course, all the regulatory work. We need to create the business environment. We need to create the right environment. Will be everything that will be about technology transfer, capacity building, that it appears to be a key issue, without forgetting the key word that was many times mentioned already this afternoon, what we consider the unserved sector, that will be the clean cooking and the energy efficiency. So in the next period, because we are at the end of our portfolio, but we will start from next year the new financial portfolio, and of course will be key to support all this action through technical assistance, of course, but also with the innovative financial instrument. We had the opportunities here at this forum to explain this innovative financing instrument. We are putting in place behind the usual grants also guarantees, equity, and we have just signed yesterday 2 new guarantees, and I have to say that we have mobilized now for these 2 years 1.5 billion to mobilize new investment through supporting guarantees for 17 billion. This is a short-term action. We wanted to use this in the next 2 years, but we have foreseen in the new portfolio an amount that is about 6 billion of euro to support all this action. We can imagine, we know by now that of course sustainable energy will remain a key focal issue for our cooperation, and of course it's the key enabler for development, but will be also fundamental if we wanted to succeed in our challenges on climate change, and that is You have listened our commissioner. This will be one of the key priorities with the Green Deal for the new European Commission for the next 5 years.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you. Now, moving away from the European Commission, move now to the European Investment Bank, sitting right next to Carla. Maria, I know you've been involved in the process. If you could share with us at least the experience of your institution in getting involved, but more importantly, looking forward in the investment you're going to be making in the energy sector in Africa, how a recommendation like this will actually impact, hopefully with more investment on the continent. Share with us the thought of EIB.
Thank you very much. The reality is I sit here with a lot of humility right now because, I'm going to be commenting on a report where so many people have contributed so much. It is, I know many colleagues of the European Commission, many colleagues in each one of the stakeholders, the private sector. I participated in a few meetings, but unfortunately not that many. And I know from the European Investment Bank the amount of expertise and care that has been put into contributing to this report. We believed in its aim. We were here last year when it was being initiated, and we thought this is what can have a transformational effect. And for us, and that is the key message I wanted to leave with you is, yes, the European Investment Bank is financing a number of projects, many projects, you can take a view on that, but what is important is how much transformational effect are we having in the markets. It's not one project here or one project there, but are we creating the markets that were being mentioned already today, and are we creating the examples for others to follow? The EIB is very active in generation of electricity, always renewable energy, and we have now, our board is discussing a policy to move away completely from fossil fuels. This is extremely controversial in the European Union as well, but we have values and we want to use finance with values as the Bank of the European Union. Within this, so generation in renewable energy and a lot of off-grid as well, because we came to the conclusion that we cannot wait. We cannot wait for the distribution grids and only the commercial scale projects to bring more electricity to as many people in Africa as possible. So a lot of that, a lot of transmission, and transmission is extremely important. The power pools, extremely important, and we've been active in those, and distribution. So all these areas to then, why are we doing this? Because of the impact in terms of development, and also because of the impact in terms of the planet that we are all sharing, and both the Sustainable Development Goals and climate in the lines of the Paris Accord are priorities of the European Union and are therefore priorities for the EIB. But we were challenged so action, what are we going to do specifically? So what I can confirm to you is that the European Investment Bank is fully committed to the recommendations of the report. We will be working together with the European Commission, with the EU delegations on the ground for the policy work. On this, they take the lead, and we accompany, we support, and we bring the investment input into the discussions. So on policy work, we will be very active. We will be active in creating markets, and I'm going to already take up the offer of President Adesina. So we are going to become partners with the African Development Bank on Desert to Power, because the Sahel area is a priority for us. So that's already one more point. And we are also working within the external investment plan with financial products that will support exactly what we want to achieve. So in fact, together, and we have to work in partnerships, alone none of us will achieve. So together with KfW, with Agence Française de Développement, with GDP, we have a product that we presented and was approved by the European Commission and the EU member states to provide partial guarantees on the obligations of payment of the off-takers, so that we start showing the market that off-takers in the end will pay, because if they don't pay, we will pay, and because we know that in the end they'll have to pay us, they will pay. And this will mean that in 5 years' time, this product will no longer be necessary, and there will be confidence, and the private sector will be able to rely on the payment obligations of the off-takers. So that's one product that we're working on. We are also, we have endorsed Renew Africa, and here it is very interesting because we're always talking, the multilaterals, about us crowding in the private sector. Well, here in Renew Africa, the private sector came to crowd us in. They said, we need the financial institutions, we know what needs to be done, we need finance, and we will need the policy work, and that's why they come to us. So these are actions that we are already working on, and that you can all fully count on EIB for.
Excellent. Thank you, Maria. Bad news for the other speakers. I'm going to actually ask you to keep it short so we can get more questions from the audience. But I know it's not fair, but we'll make sure that at least we'll get you to get your points across. Now, Daniel, let me turn over to you from the African Development Bank, where you are leading the renewable energy work there. You are hosting us here at AEF. You certainly have the ambition to light up Empower Africa. Hearing the recommendation from Kende and the platform, what do they mean for the African Development Bank, and how far do you want to take this recommendation and making sure it feed into the work you're already doing for the bank?
Right, no, thank you very much, Ibrahim, and indeed good afternoon to everyone. First of all, I would like to say it was a great privilege to be able to chair one of the working groups, but it was also an easy task in many respects because we had so many engaged members, so I really want to recognize the hard work of everyone in producing this report, and also really highlight that everyone showed a huge sense of commitment, a sense of urgency, but also, as Kande highlighted at the beginning, that this is not becoming one other report. There are many reports, but really one that leads to concrete action. So it's great that we have an action agenda as part of the executive summary, and now the focus has to be on taking these actions forward to implementation. So from my side, from the African Development Bank side, we're intervening, of course, on many of these aspects, but I just want to highlight 3 or 4 points very concretely of actions that we want to take forward. One is, was highlighted, the importance of investing in renewable energy generation. That's a key priority, but we cannot only focus on the generation side, just producing more capacity, if we also don't take into account the baseload requirements. Recently, a Minister of Finance of a Southern African country came to see us. He was saying, well, look, we have coal resources. We need coal for our baseload generation. And it's not good enough to just say, as our president announced, we cannot finance coal, which is good, but it's far stronger if we can offer a credible alternative, which is why we have launched the Green Baseload Facility, which is part of our Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa. Just 2 weeks ago, our governors approved a conversion of our Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa into a special fund, and it will have one component focused on green baseload, to be able to help African countries look at how different renewable technologies can be combined to provide baseload equivalent, how the networks can be strengthened to absorb more intermittent renewables, how storage can be expanded. So I think that's one very important area, and it's highlighted in the report, and certainly one of the actions that we are now moving forward on our side. A second point, just briefly to highlight, it was mentioned earlier, this is the entire segment of mini-grids. I think we have many developers and stakeholders here in the room, and the challenge was highlighted. We still have the profitability issue, yet we're not talking about a level playing field. There are a lot of subsidies, of course, going into the grid. So there is a need for a result-based financing for mini-grids, and it's very good that this is recognized explicitly in the action agenda. And we on the African Development Bank side, we're working on a result-based financing facility for mini-grids, and we're pleased to be able to cooperate with many of the stakeholders in the room, whether it's the African Mini-Grid Developer Association, I think Aaron is somewhere in the room, and others. Thirdly, I just would like to highlight the clean cooking sector, and our president also highlighted that this is a key priority, but we have been struggling as African Development Bank to engage in this sector. And we cannot sort of continue just having these small grants, philanthropic interventions. It will not get us to where we need to get. So I'm very pleased that actually later this afternoon we have a dedicated boardroom session for the first ever private sector vehicle, the Spark Plus Fund, that will kind of help to support companies working in the clean cooking sector to take the next stage in their growth development. We think that that's a critical kind of element of creating a market for clean cooking solutions, and we're pleased to be able to kind of bring this already this year to the Africa Investment Forum. And finally, and that's just the last point, the entire upstream work in terms of policy dialogue, engagement with governments working on regulation is critical. That's sort of really what will make everything else work. And this is sort of an area where we want to do more. We're launching tomorrow, for example, the 2019 edition here at the Africa Investment Forum of the Electricity Regulatory Index. But there needs to be support to take those recommendations forward, to address the shortcomings. And that's really where we want to engage, where we want to work with partners, and I think we have a great group of stakeholders here in the platform to take this forward. So I'll stop here, but there could be a lot more to be said. Thank you.
Excellent, Danielle. It's really encouraging to see that you're not waiting for the platform and the recommendation to get into action. So I think that also shows the momentum is building up at the African Development Bank. I saw my good friend Linda next to you when you're talking about clean cooking, shaking her head because that's her passion. But keep that for a second, Linda. I'll come to you, and I'm going to start with Valerie and finish up with that clean cooking. Now, Valerie, you bring in the private sector perspective, obviously, being extremely pragmatic and concrete, obviously. My question to you, out of the recommendation that you heard, if you to engage with policymakers on the continent and making sure they take the necessary reform to foster your investment in the energy sector, what would it be?
So thank you for giving some minutes to IPP or private sector developers. I will try to share my experience in two kinds of projects to be very focused on examples. First, I would like to acknowledge Mr. Bakary testimony because I can see exactly the benefit of what have been said by the government leadership, specific agency for development of renewable energy visibility. I will give an example of what we've done for an hydropower plant in Cameroon. It took us 5 years to develop. With all the sponsors, we put 45 million euros at risk between the starting the development up to the closing of the deal. So who can bear such risks? That's the first point in such kind of country. What we were facing first was financing institutions. So it was a 1.2 billion euros deal. We had 11 DFIs and 5 local banks to manage because it's a hard task to manage all those institutions. So there is a recommendation of alignment of DFIs. I clearly say loudly, it is a need. It is mandatory because if not, all the sponsors are killed by the work to do to align all the DFIs. Sorry to be a bit clear, but it's very, very important because we spend so much time and money in aligning financing. At the end of the day, it goes to the tariff. So it's a very bad message for the government. A second message is the distribution companies, the off-taker healthy situation. So if we don't help the local companies, distribution companies, to be in a healthy position, then you struggle to finance in a private sector the deal. For that, you have to reduce the losses. So it is a technical measure, but it is very important because in the vast majority of the African utilities, there are so many losses, which is a loss for all the country, by the way, or not for everybody, but majority. And second, subsidies. We should give the subsidies to whom needs the subsidies, and not to the whole sector. So I have seen a huge push in Egypt, for example, for an increase in the tariff. It is very courageous, but then it will push also to the energy efficiency, which I strongly believe in. Right. My second and last example will be with off-grid. So as EDF, we do both because we think you have to address all the needs, so big and large-scale IPPs and off-grid. We started with off-grid a few years ago, and we have been facing huge difficulties in the financing, once more. Too small, too risky, not like this, not like that. At the end of the day, we as a sponsor were obliged to finance on an equity base. It is not sustainable if we want to address a big mass of off-grid sector. So we are now in a bottleneck because of lack of financing for this off-grid market. And last word is about still the off-grid sector. We are developing the cooking offers through our electricity off-grid companies, because we believe that the gas cooking solution for domestic use and the electric cooking devices with pay-as-you-go is part of the portfolio we need to give to our customers.
Thank you, Valerie. Yes, you can clap, actually. Having been with the World Bank for 10 years, I can certainly relate to that comment about the DFI, but I leave it to that, the DFI, to come into the need, they need to come together to make life easier for the private sector as well. Now, last but not least, Linda, I have two questions for you. One being that you've been involved in the process. What hasn't been talked about so far is actually what does it mean for the African SME, which I believe that you represent. But more importantly, from the recommendation we talked about so far, what do they mean concretely to the work you're doing in Kenya? Clean cooking is one of them, but you do wonderful stuff. So take us through your experience from the process. What do they mean exactly for you in Kenya?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I'll try and talk as quickly as I can. I would be remiss if I don't couch my remarks by just drawing your attention to the cover of the report. Many of you might have just seen the bulb. You know, I see a dignified woman. I see a multitasking woman that's pretty clever, but I also see clean cooking, right? I also see a dignified way of cooking, and I want to just define that a little bit. I'm very pleased to be able to put my notes away, because I think last year I was a lone crusader talking about clean cooking and wanting that to be elevated. So let me just really quickly define clean cooking, and this is really it, right? Standing in front a multi-burner stove that produces a clean cooking gas. So I'd like to really, now that clean cooking has taken quite a bit of attention, it is important that we understand what that is and we actually make the interventions in the right way. I have been in fora where, when we are talking about clean cooking for the African woman, it's not a dignified woman that we see on the covers. It is solutions that are probably not one that we would use in any other part of the world. So I really want to challenge all the people that are joining me in the sector that clean cooking is a woman standing up in front of a multi-burner cook stove with a clean, safe, affordable, reliable fuel, right? So thank you. I just needed to say that. But just back to your question, it has been an absolute pleasure working with the 50 experts that were selected to put together these recommendations. And for myself as a woman entrepreneur in the private sector, my organization is Giraffe Bioenergy. And you might think that all I do is clean cooking, but that is all I wanted to highlight. That's what I like to highlight, because it is sort of the silent tsunami, as the president said. But my organization also generates electricity through waste to energy process, right? But I want to just express that energy as an enabler, we have to think of it holistically. I think we've heard about the water, food, energy nexus in a circular economy. So you really cannot just isolate energy on its own, and you cannot just isolate electrification on its own. You really have to think of it holistically, and that is how we're going to move our economies. So for example, we really have to tap into the base of agriculture. We have to tap in the base of sanitation and water provision. You have to think about energy, and you have to think about livelihoods, because we're going to put up all this electricity, and we are not going to be able to have a base load. We cannot sell expensive products to poor people. So we really have to think about generating economies and really stimulating livelihoods for us to actually move the economy forward. So I think your question was, what in the recommendation specifically would impact the SMEs, such as Giraffe Bioenergy, which is in development in Kenya? Certainly, I don't want to repeat what has been very carefully listed here by Yande, but certainly looking at the projects that have the ability to scale is very, very important. It's been mentioned here that, you know, grant philanthropic approaches are really not going to get us to SDG 7 by 2030. That is really the fact. So we really have to look at ways that we are holistically looking at solving these problems, both electrification and cooking at scale right from the beginning. Enough pilots? In my view, let's really look at solutions that can scale and scale very, very quickly. Otherwise, the numbers that are being impacted are not going to change. We're still going to have those people impacted by the lack of clean cooking fuel and also by the lack of electricity and therefore lack of development. Final point, the other recommendation that's been put and but bears repeating is cooperations among the DFIs and the commercial lenders. You know, to really understand if this is really a priority, then the access to this financing should be very well streamlined, with everybody coming together, the TA and all the other requirements coming together very quickly. And you're looking at me to stop, so I'll stop right there. But thank you very much for highlighting clean cooking at the same level as electrification. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I was looking at you to say, I like what you're saying, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
And now, very quickly, before I open up to get one or two questions from the floor, Makenda, you've been listening to this patiently on your corner. And my question, just a quick reaction to what you heard, because there's some new recommendations that have emerged from the conversation that we had. Just a few words before we then open up for feedback from the audience.
I'll just say it's exciting. I like the issue about alignment, and we have it in the report of all these DFIs, getting that understanding amongst them. But also the point raised by EDF. Energy projects have long incubation periods. Somebody has to pay for that pre-investment stage. Small entrepreneurs, medium-sized mini grids, they don't have that money. So I'm happy you highlighted it even for the big projects, $45 million, 5 years. Small projects also take maybe 1 or 2 years to build. Right. So I like that they emphasize that. And finally, what Carla said, and also Daniel, we've done recommendations, but they're the operators. They have the concessional financing, the capacity building. You need a lot of capacity building along the value chain. If you look at the report, we had to look at generation by itself, transmission, and we spent a lot of time on distribution because we don't talk about these bankrupt utilities. And what Mr. Bakuri said, you need heads of states that will be determined to make those utilities profitable. There's a lot of corruption in those utilities. You know, I'm an African, I can talk about it. Governance issues within utilities. Utilities even blackmail governments before elections because they don't want you to reform them. I advise presidents, begin to reform your utilities the day you have power. That means you have 5 years to fix them. Kagame did it. The rest can do it.
Thank you, Kenda. Thank you. Now we have time for 1 or 2 questions from the audience before we wrap up. Oh, I see many hands after. Should we stand until 8 o'clock in the evening so we can get more questions? Anyway, we should have a microphone circulating. If you could just state your name, and if I beg you, as we say in Nigeria, just to keep your question very short.
Okay, thank you. I'm Rania Kargbo. I'm from Sierra Leone, and I'm here representing Sahara Ventures. Dr. Yumkeva, thank you. You're my mentor. I followed you to the UN in senior management, and I'm following you to development, and I'm going to follow you to the presidency. So, as a first female, so watch out. I'm very happy to hear about energy because most of the failures in the healthcare or any system in Africa is because of energy. All our hospitals, we have all the equipment, they're donated, we can't power them, they blow up, there's nothing. So one of my goals is to create a totally green environment where we're going to rely on solar power, and we're going to have a cancer center, and also we're going to have surgical centers, state-of-the-art, that will focus on the Mana River Union, Liberia, Sierra Leone, so millions. The problem is we don't have funding to help us with the startup costs, you know, for small entrepreneurs or small businesses. And also Sierra Leone, we have a branding issue. So I'm glad I'm here. I'm using this platform to tell you to help us to transform Sierra Leone. So what can we do to tap into all these billions and millions and actually have direct capital investments to small and business, women-owned businesses, and impact projects that will alleviate deprivation and help poverty? Thanks.
Thank you. We got somebody in the back there. Could you do me a favor? Can we just keep it short, actually, so we can Can you stand up and say your name, please?
So Eric Tambo is my name. I'm coordinating research activity at the Pan-African University of the African Union in Tlemcen on energy and water. So my question is more related to small entrepreneurs and youth. So how to integrate youth, the dynamic in terms of entrepreneurship, startup creation in these energy access sectors. So particularly talking digitalization as entry point. So we see in Kenya what the youth could do when we provide an appropriate framework in terms of innovating in using technology. So, and particularly looking maybe at the African Development Bank, at the European Union, which program do you have to support youth that you can combine with renewable energy, linking it also with digitalization?
Excellent, thank you. We get, I see a hand just right here, back. He's right there with his microphone.
Thank you very much. My name is Manda from the African Forum for Utility Regulators. So here's the question. You have said that only 2 utilities in Africa are viable financially. And yet most of the projects that are being supported by financiers are IPPs selling into the single buyer, who is a vertically integrated government-owned utility, who is also not viable. So now we have a situation where the monies that we spend on developing and giving to the IPPs for renewable energy cannot be recouped in the time frame in the, that we have set for ourselves. And further...
So the question is?
Okay, so the question is, we should not neglect the already existing government utilities that to a very large extent support the power flow from the IPPs who are being funded, and then make the IPPs non-viable because the single buyer is not viable.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
Can we get just one last question here, and I think we'll have to go back because then wrap up. I see a hand in the back there. I'll come to you, sir. Go ahead.
Thorsten Preutschner, Soventix GmbH. We are developing a solar project all over sub-Saharan Africa. And it's a little bit in the same way like you mentioned, what is really the bottleneck for making the dawn of the renewable century in Africa? Because we are just in the beginning, but it's not starting. Why it's not starting is not the financing. Financing is available. It's not the technical solutions. The technical solutions are there. It is the regulatory how to evacuate the energy for realistic pricing, even with the utilities or with independent parties. Then we need the regulatory to have the chance really to sell the energy to other parties if the utilities are not interested. Why? There are gigawatts of projects already existing and not realized, although the energy is cheaper than any other resource that's available. That is my question, and what we can do to make a change in this regulatory.
All right, we'll get one last question here. We have to go back to the, but unfortunately, get just on the back there. He's been raising his hand for quite some time.
Thank you. My name is Devin Naidu from the Private Finance Advisory Network. We support projects secure private sector finance. I'm really glad to hear that there's so much of interest in clean cooking. The reality is it's actually very difficult for us to work with them because they are mostly small projects. And one has to find a way of putting a lot of these small projects together in order to be able to attract the kind of financial thresholds that the private sector is looking for. And I would think that, and we've been trying to find mechanisms to bundle these projects together. And I think that there needs to be some kind of platform for these projects to be able to be jointly financed in some kind of way. And it's not that they're not a viable project. It's just that they're below the threshold that financiers would want to look at. So my question is, where is that platform for multiple projects?
We got so many questions. Let's see if you remember all of them. That's the challenge, as I always moderate. Question number one, when it comes to SMEs, how do we actually get a startup cost, which is difficult for SMEs to gather as they get into the energy sector? Question number two, we have not heard much about the perspective of the youth and the young entrepreneurs in the platform. Question number 3, it's good to develop the IPPs, but let's make sure also our utilities are not weakened so they can have at least somebody to interact with in the sector. Question number 4, the regulatory framework is extremely important to develop the sector in the continent, so we need to make sure that regulation is actually in place. And last question is size matters. So all these smaller SMEs are getting into the sector. How do we create a platform and make it attractive to syndicate these different markets? I think we cover all the questions. Now, I don't expect each of you to go through each of the questions. We don't have the time, but maybe randomly. Let me start with you, Linda. Any question that you want to take
absolutely.
quickly?
Thank you very much. I want to take 2 questions. The first one is about
maybe one question.
startup costs, right? I mean, I've been a developer of my organization, again, producing both electricity and cooking fuel for over a year, and that is a problem that I've had to encounter, not in being independently wealthy, not having the networks. So I'm curious to hear the answer to that. But I really want to speak to the gentleman there about small cooking projects. That is definitely a failing of our sector over the last 30 or 40 years when this came to market, where we've had a small approaches, right? Whereas in Kenya, where we are really looking at this as a national priority, and my organization in particular, we're looking at large-scale ethanol production, for instance, production of ECF. And we will be looking at project financing up in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So I think the narrative that this is a small, little by little, village level solution, I think that narrative is being shattered. We really have to look at this at scale from the beginning. So we can talk.
And that is about to change because we just launched in September with the World Bank and the UN a 500 million clean cooking fund.
All right, that sounds... Kenda, thank you for jumping in. Daniel, any feedback quickly on those questions?
Sure, very quickly. Just on the clean cooking side, I've mentioned earlier, I think the Clean Cooking Fund is a very good thing, but it needs to be complemented by market-driven approaches. And this is why I think an effort such as Spark Plus as a first fund in the sector is something that is needed in order to grow these businesses. Just one other point I would like to highlight. I think in terms of sort of the support, we need to be able to provide support along sort of the life cycle. So there needs to be indeed early stage support. The likes of PFAN, Get Invest and others can provide sort of some of this early stage support. Our Green Mini Grid Help Desk does that as well. So that other tools and instruments can pick up these projects and provide the next stage of financing. Right. So for example, we support developers through our help desk on mini-grids. We would like these mini-grid developers then to come later when they're ready to get support, for example, from the Facility for Energy Inclusion, which is up and operational, also thanks to the support of the European Commission.
Thank you, Daniel. And Maria, quickly, any reaction to what you heard and some of the questions?
Yeah, I think I'll take the questions on access to equity or access to capital for small and medium-sized enterprises. It was not the topic of this panel, but there has been many others and a number of boardrooms about venture capital and risk capital. And right before this session, Linda, Carla, and I were in another session organized by the African Development Bank on women as champions for finance. And what I can tell you is, when it is the experience of EIB that when we're contributing to a venture capital fund that has women in management and has women in the investment committee, then many more women-owned or women-led companies get access to this equity. So what we need to have is more women in the decision-making positions so that the women that are entrepreneurs will have access to equity. And in a way, the same thing applies to youth. And there was the question about youth. When you're targeting with your venture capital funds startups, or when you are targeting innovative solutions, and what we know is that in Africa, you know the solutions for your own problems. What you need is equity, you need finance. Like in every other region in the world, we need equity and we need finance. So what we need to be is supporting those that are willing to take risks and that are willing to put their effort, their labor, create jobs and bring solutions.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. Carla?
I don't know, maybe I take the regulatory approach question because it was not tackled before. Let me say that if in Europe we have succeeded to have the market integration is thanks to the work that we have done for the regulatory integration. So this will be key, and this we know that it's the key issue in many of our partner countries. We are just working to this, we are supporting through technical assistance to sharing our own Europe experience in Africa level, at different level, could be at the level of African Union Commission. We are working with Abu Zaid, the commissioner, on this, just to see how we can approach, how we can improve the regulatory approach at continental level and the national level. So continental level, capacity building, sharing experience, and national level, supporting the reform in each country to what we call the budgetary support. So key action to intervene in the regulatory approach to improve this.
Thank you, Carla. And Valerie?
Yeah. For me, what's most important is, as I have told, the national utilities bankruptcy. There is no fatality. There is a lack of leadership or willingness. You said it perfectly, starting on the top of the government. We have been supporting as a utility other utilities, and we have recovered 30–40% of losses in less than 2 years. It was feasible. It is feasible. But you need a strong support and a strong willingness. That's the first for the losses. Second, subsidies. As I told, there is a need for reallocating subsidies among the country and the customers. And third, cost of generation. Have a merit order of the generation assets, even renegotiating PPAs, if we think that the PPAs negotiated a long time ago are maybe not so balanced. But if you take losses, cost of generation, and subsidies, you have the magic formula for resolving this issue.
Absolutely. We've been looking for the magic formula. We just got it from Valerie. We're going to do actually the 30-second message. And Ken, I'm going to turn over to you in 30 seconds. What is that you want us to take away from this conversation?
30 seconds is implementation. We're already, as a platform, with the challenge provided by the EU and some friends, the past 2 days, they've been bombarding us, what happens next?
Right.
So just to say to colleagues that we're planning already how we give life to the recommendations.
Excellent.
They'll hear from us soon.
All right, so Linda, 30 seconds. What will be?
Yeah, absolutely. The clean cooking sector is highly investable, right? Nairobi, every household spends $30 a month on clean cooking, and that is a market that spans in the billions, second only to tea. So absolutely, the notion that clean cooking is not an investable this sector should just disappear.
Excellent. I'm loving it. 30 seconds. So Danielle, what will be the key message in 30 seconds?
Well, in addition to what has been said, it's really the alignment. Let's use the platform to align all the stakeholders and implement the actions that have been defined.
Excellent. Maria?
For me, the key would be partnerships, so that it is in that partnership of private sector, public sector, multilaterals, the regulators, the off-takers, that we can achieve our goal, and therefore there's no other way than working together.
Carla?
I wanted to follow what Ken said. Go now to implementing, to the implementation. This is the key message for the donors, to the financial institution, to all the partners. And the second key word is, for me, the political ownership. In all this subject, we need to work with the private sector, but we need to still working with the public one, with the governments. And when we talk about the regulatory approach, we need the governance with us. When we talk about utilities, we need the governments with us.
Excellent.
Political ownership.
Excellent. Valerie, what will be your message?
Partnership between private and public, and between European and African companies. That will be...
All right, so implementation, clean cooking can be marketable and profitable. Alignment is extremely important. Partnership is important. Political leadership and ownership is important, but also working in partners to make sure between Europe and Africa we work together toward actually achieving result. That will be the takeaway from our conversation, and I'd like to thank our speakers for being absolutely productive and cultivating. I don't know where the photographers are, but if you're closer, you can just take a picture of the panelists. And as I call on stage Anne Charlotte Bournonville, if you, Anne, are you in the room? Exat with the head of unit for international relations and enlargement, and the Director General for Energy and European Commission for our final work to wrap up our conversations. So our speakers, if you can just stand here, we'll take a picture. Yes. Oh, we'll take a picture at the end. All right, that's fine. Let's go get Maria. It's okay. We'll take a picture at the end. Yes. Danielle? I know you guys love the stage, but you need to get off. Thank you.